All right, so welcome back. Thank you for your flexibility this week and changing to tonight. And this happens sometimes in my life. Things come up, which did again tonight, which we're going to curtail the class by a few minutes. Not much, but I have to stop a little early for a phone call. So where are we holding? First of all, I want to acknowledge something. I've heard from a few of you offline that both you're liking the class, Baruch Hashem, and also finding some of it confusing. That's natural for two reasons. Number one, the subject matter for some of you is brand new. And because it's a brand new subject, you don't have context, and that's partially what I'm trying to provide. And number two, it's not just the subject matter, but the understanding of each individual item and how to wrap your head around it. So I'm going to continue to try to make it easier to understand. And if it's still at some point you have concepts or ideas that are not clear, you'll let me know and I'll try to clarify for you. What I do, I want to start by giving just a 2-minute refresher, a summary of where we're holding before we move on to the text. We're going to cover a number of lines. Last week, I think we did 2 lines, but we'll go through a little bit more tonight. And also, somebody mentioned to me, with no names, obviously, that the amount of text we cover seems to be very brief. So the truth is that you're going to have sometimes we're going to meet and it's going to be 2 or 3 lines, and sometimes we're going to do 20 lines. It's the nature of the beast, especially in the beginning, where it's necessary to move at a slower pace to understand the concepts. So in the first chapter, which we finished already last week, in the beginning of the class, it was basically broken into 2 parts. The first part, the Alter Rebbe, the Admor Zaken, provided us with many questions, very few answers. And then we were introduced to 2 new concepts. One, what was called the Nefesh HaBehamit, the animalistic soul, which we said has nothing to do with an animal, but is basically the ego. It's what I want. And even though the Nefesh HaBehamit is also what helps to do mitzvot most of the time and chesed, there's still an aspect of me in there and an ego, and not in a negative way. That is also the part of me that makes me hungry. It's the part of me that wants to make me sleep, and that part of me is really good, very active. And then that rest of that first chapter dealt with the topic of the Nefesh HaBehamit. The second chapter, which we began last week also, then moved into the second soul. Remember, we said that one of the chidushim of the Baal Shem Tov was this concept of godliness, that there's Hashem, there's creation, and there's godliness, or what we call Elokut. And this Elokut manifests itself in our second soul, our Nefesh Elokit, or the godly soul that's in us. And we made a distinction, the Admor Zaken made a distinction between everything in creation and this soul. Everything in creation, we know that it says in Pirkei Avot, in Mishnah, says Ba'asamar Mamarot Nivra Olam, that the world was created with 10 utterances. Hashem said, let there be light, let there be this, let there be that, and it came into existence. But on the other hand, we also said in the beginning of the chapter that how Hashem created us and gave us life was Vayipach be'apav nishmat chaim. Hashem breathed the breath of life into Adam HaRishon that gave him life, and demonstrated with a couple of psukim and a couple of comments that the difference between ma'amar, or the speech, and the breath is speech is external, the breath is internal. It came from the internal, in quotes, in the ruchani, in the spiritual aspect, from the inside of Hashem, and was blown into every human being through the initial soul that went to Adam HaRishon. And therefore, we have this idea that says in Sefer Iyov that our neshama, specifically the Nefesh Elokit, is a chelek Elokam mima'al, a piece of God from above. Again, we're talking in an anthropomorphic sense because there is no physicality to Hashem. There's no physicality to the soul. So what we're left with is the idea. And in addition to that, we also gave a mashal. And this mashal is going to come up, or a parable. It's going to show up many times throughout the book. The mashal of sunlight. And let me just use even a different thing. I actually tried this as a kid. Don't ask. Strange. If you take a flashlight in the dark, and you stand outside in the dark, and you turn the flashlight on, so you see this the light, the stream of light. When you turn it off, the light stops. And I tried as a kid to see if I could watch it end. Okay, go figure. But the idea is that that light itself is not something, it is an extension of the flashlight, or in this case, the sunlight is an extension of the sun. It is the direct result of something coming from the sun, but it itself doesn't have its own character, its own sense of being, so to speak. So too, the mashal is that Hashem is quoted Kiviyachol, the sun. The neshama is an extension of that, and that's what in us is our second neshama, our nefesh elokit. What exactly is this nefesh elokit for? What's its purpose? We will get to, but first we have to understand a little bit more about this nefesh elokit and in its construct and what it is. So let's take a look now. I'm going to put the text on the screen for those of you who don't have it in front of you. And thank you, Cynthia, for putting it as one document. I'm putting it as multiple just so I can move it into different parts of the screen. So right in the about 3 or 4 lines in, you'll see 2 dots where it says Kach Ayin Daled Mem. Ayin Daled Mem stands for Al Devar Mashal, meaning in a parable way, in a way of a parable. So now we just said before that Hashem, or that we represented the difference between speech and breath, or blowing out. And we said that blowing out, so to speak, comes from a much deeper place in the human being, and kiviyachol from a deeper place in Hashem. And that's what gave the neshama. That was the extension. That was the neshama of the person. Now we're going to go even deeper, because there's something even deeper than the breath of a person. Kachal dvar mashal. So too, as in a fashion of a parable, Yisrael alu b'machashava, that the Jewish people arose in God's thought process. Now, before I go any further, I'll really read a couple more lines and then I'll explain a little. For it says, B'ni b'chovi Yisrael, my firstborn Israel, B'ni matem l'Hashem Elokechem. We are the children of Hashem. Okay? You are the children of God. You and me were the children of Hashem. First, we have to understand 2 things. Number 1, what does it mean, machashava of Hashem, the thought of God? And second of all, why is it that we are called banim, sons, specifically sons, not yeladim, but sons, banim. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read a few lines. I'm going to explain, and then I'm going to come back and revisit this section. I'm over here right now. Perush, the explanation of this statement that we are the children of Hashem, and that that the neshama of the Jewish person arose in the thought process of God. We have to understand one thing before we continue. We went from the idea that Hashem created b'ma'amar, with words or with speech. Then we talked about Hashem breathed in from his inner being, so to speak. Again, we're talking anthropomorphically, the soul. But now we're going even deeper. We're going into the thoughts of Hashem. Let's compare it to the human being. I can talk like I'm doing right now. I'm talking. And by doing so, you're hearing words. I don't have to expend a lot of energy. I don't have to do a lot of things. I just have to speak. I have to use my words. When I blow out, when I go, first I have to take a breath, and then it comes from inside me. And that's more internal than speech. Speech is external. The blowing comes from internal. What about thoughts? Thoughts are the most internal I have. Why? Because if I stop talking for a moment and I start thinking about something, or Hashem, you can't read my mind. Can you imagine how horrible this world would be if God allowed people to read each other's minds? Do you ever stop to think about that? It would be a terrible world. You know, hey, how you doing? I'm doing fine. You think to yourself, just leave me alone already, right? So you would not want other people to hear your thoughts. But in general, the thought process is very, very personal. When I'm breathing out, when I'm speaking, you're very well aware of that. But if I'm thinking, you are not aware of what's going on in my mind, in my head. So in the concept of, and we'll see what this means, in the concept of the thought process of Hashem, the thought process of Hashem gave birth, so to speak, to the Jewish neshama. We're going to see what that means. Hang in there. Perush, right here. Just like the child, the son, comes from the brain of the father, I'll explain in a moment. So too, as it were, Nishmat kol ish Yisrael nimshacha mimachashavto v'chochmato yitbarach. So too does the neshama of every Jew come from the machshava and the wisdom of Hashem. De'ihu chakim. Oh, fine. So what does that mean? He's making a comparison, which we're going to have to expand on in a moment. That just like a person has a thought process, and that's even more internal and more personal and more part of that individual than the speech or the blowing aspect. You understand, even if you never thought about it, that your thoughts are much more deeper, much more personal, much more of you than anything else. So too, when Hashem thought, again, we're talking anthropomorphically, and we'll see what that means. His machashava decided to create man, to meaning in a sense, this neshama. It's the same aspect as when a person, a man, has in his brain the idea that the child comes from the brain of the man. What does that even mean? The child comes, the ben nimshach mimoach av. Doesn't seem it's born, it's drawn from there. So there's two ways to explain what this means. On the one hand, in the time period of the Admor HaZaken, it was believed that the zera, the sperm of the man, initiated actually physically in the brain of the man. Obviously, we know today in science that that's not the situation. However, where does the entire thought process of the union between man and woman begin? Begins in the brain. So too, everything that happens with the neshama is directly connected to the machashava of Hashem, just like whatever led to the child's birth began, if you work your way all the way back to the brain of the man. Now, this sounds a little bit confusing, a little bit out there. What exactly is he talking about? So first we have to understand, what in the world do you mean Hashem thinks? What does that mean, the machashava of Hashem? So we have to first understand that. I don't want to get lost. We have to first making this connection between the idea that just like a child is born, a ben is born, and if you work your way all the way back to the moment before the child was even conceived, the entire process began in the brain of the father. So too, the neshama that is inside you and inside me, the nefesh elokit, began from the neshama, from the machashava, the quote brain trust or brain center of Hashem. But again, what does that even mean? The brain center of Hashem. Let's take a look at what he's quoting now is the Ramban. First of all, he'll tell us like this. De'ihu chakim v'lo b'chokhma yediyah. God is wise, but not with known wisdom. Let me explain. Let me translate and then I'll explain. Elahu v'chokhmato echad. Hashem's wisdom is something that we cannot as human beings conceive of. He and his wisdom are one. What does that mean? Listen to what he quotes now from the Ramban. Moshe katava Rambam, shehu hamayda v'hu hayodea v'chule. The Rambam tells us, and we're going to take a look at that for a moment. The Rambam tells us to understand the concept of God's quote knowledge versus us. Before we look at this, if you think about a process of how you think, and then you do something. So there's me, there's the ability I have to think about something and do it, and then there's the thing I do. They're all stages, right? If I want to build a table, the idea first comes up in my brain, I think about it, but there was me. I had the intellect to think about it. I thought about it, and then I did it. It's stages. However, look what it says here in the Rambam. Nincet omer, hu hayodea, v'hu hayadua, v'hu hadeya atzma hakol echad. Hashem is the knower, Hashem is the known, and Hashem is the action or the knowledge, all wrapped into one. What does that mean in normal English? I just said that if I think about something I want to do, There's me. I have the intellect to think about it. I think about it and I do it. By Hashem, that is all one thing. That's all Hashem happens at the exact instant, if we want to talk in terms of time. But if you're sitting there going, what is he talking about? You're in good company. The Rambam says, this thing, this idea that Hashem has this, all these things, not the separation of knowledge and how to, and the seichel and the doing, but it's all wrapped in one. The mouth doesn't really have the ability to say this, nor the ears to hear it, nor the heart of man to understand it. We cannot fully grasp what this even means. Why? Why can't we make this clear? Why is this not clear to understand what the Rambam says, that whereas we have multiple parts in our stages of how we process something, and God is instantaneous and it's all one? Take a look. Look what he says next. First he says, like the Rambam, right here, right? We already just said that. He quotes the Ramban that we really cannot fully grasp this idea. For it says, the second pasuk should be well known to you. We say it's part of the Haftarah every time there's a fast day, public fast day. We make a statement. The Navi says that our thoughts, the Navi is talking about Hashem. Hashem says, Hilo machshavotai, my thoughts, my thought process is not like your thought process. What do you think that means? Does it mean he just thinks differently? Because that's what the translation says. Hashem says, Hilo machshavotai, my machashavot, machshavotechem are like your thought process. But that's not what it means. It means that you're trying to compare not just apples and oranges, you're trying to compare apples with planet Pluto, which isn't a planet maybe this week, I don't know. It's not that they are different, they're totally not this, not even the same world. Literally, you cannot compare them. Yes.
Isn't it that we think and then we do, and Hashem thinks it's being done as he's thinking?
That's
Isn't
exactly correct. That's exactly correct.
It's like what you told us before to understand Baruch She'amar.
Yes. What do you mean?
You said that you daven, you say that paragraph, that bracha, in the beginning of Pesukei de Zimra.
Yes.
Baruch She'amar v'gozer v'kayam v'kiyah. זאת אומרת, הגזירה והאמירה והקיום, הכל בבת אחת.
Correct. Now, you'll notice if you take a look at the chat, which just posted, Cynthia posted, that she recalls that one time during Kibbutz Arisha, I described Hashem's dibur and thought intention were one and not separate acts, and that's correct. That's exactly what I was saying here. This is what the Rambam is telling us. This is what we're saying, that what the Admor Zaken is telling us. Everything is in one. But again, it's easy for us to use these words and say this, but to truly understand the depth of all this, we can understand a little bit of it. It's just we have to understand Hashem thinks differently. Why do we care? Why do I care right now describing how Hashem thinks and all? Because we just said, if you look here, right? That Hashem, that our neshamot arose in the machashava of Hashem. So if every single thing of Hashem is bevat achat, is at one moment, the thought process, the action, the ability to do is all the exact same, is the same thing, and at the same moment, so to speak. That meant that at the moment Hashem had this machashava, again, anthropomorphically, when he had the machashava to create the neshama elokit, it was Hashem. Hashem was putting into us the nefesh elokit directly from Hashem. Take a look, and we'll see more on this now. Now, this means, let me take it off a screen share for 1 second and ask your question. Feel free to take yourself off of mute if you want to answer. Let me just turn my page here to get the right page. We just now made a statement. The statement was that all of our neshamot, every one of us has a nefesh elokit. It stems from Hashem. It is elokut, it's godliness, comes from Hashem. We originally said part of his blowing in, And we went even farther and deeper, literally in a physical sense and anthropomorphically in a spiritual sense, even deeper, that the whole concept of the neshama is already a part of Hashem. Does that lead to any big, very simple, obvious question? Every single neshama comes directly from that source. Every nefesh Elokim. Any question? And I don't mean how do we know that? I'm saying a simple, obvious question.
How could you have a person who has this neshama elokit deny the existence of God? How would you have atheists, agnostics?
Okay, because they have free choice to do that.
Yeah, but it's ironic, isn't it?
It is.
Because they're using what they have to do it.
Yeah, right, exactly. No, that's fine. I'm looking at a more basic question than that. If anyone wants to think and take a chance. It's worth 50 points. What's that?
I thought souls were different,
Meaning?
one from the other. So if it's all from Hashem, so that means that everything that comes from Hashem can be different or the same or very confusing.
Okay, good. I'm glad you're confused. Okay, I'll tell you why I'm glad you're confused.
Of a mint and coins that are all the same versus Kamoshe Pneihem Shonot Zomizav, Deotehem Shonot Zomizav.
Correct. Okay, so we're going to see that. I'm going to take into account what you're all saying right now. And let's take a look at the next couple lines, because now we're going to see, let me come back here. Okay, where it starts with the words ve'af, right over here, ve'af. Now, normally the word af means like afilu, like even though. Right now I'm going to translate it as, it is true that. The following is a true statement, which he's going to prove later. But right now you probably already understand this yourselves. Ve'af, sheyesh revevot minei chilukei madregot b'neshamot. There are tens of thousands of different levels of neshamot. We're talking neshama elokit right now. Gavoa gavoa, le'en kates, endless levels of different neshamot elokit. Kamo godel ma'alat neshamot avot, u'Moshe Rabbeinu alav hashalom, al neshamot dorenu ele de'akeh ve'akve de'meshiche, shehem bechinat hakabayim mamash. Okay, what is going on? He says like this. He says, yes, first thing we have to understand, or not to understand, the first thing we have to accept is that there are tens of thousands of different levels of the neshama elokit. As an example, he tells us that the neshamot of someone like the avot, Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, Moshe Rabbeinu's neshama, was ki'ilu so much higher level than the people of our generation, which are like the heels of Mashiach. This does not mean that we're the ikvita de Mashiach, the time of Mashiach. He's saying that if that prior generation, meaning Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, and Moshe Rabbeinu alav shalom, they were like the level of Mashiach, kind of a soul, we are nothing more than just the heels of a soul, with that level. You'll see why he's using that mashal in a minute. Shehem bechinat hakabayim mamash, legabei hamoach v'arosh. He said, let me take a look at your body. You have a head, right? You have a brain up here. You have a body that has all these many, many myriad of parts. You mean to tell me that your toe is as significant a part of your body as your brain, as of your head? It's one body. So too, that there is one series of neshamot, of tens of thousands of levels of neshamot. Some on a much higher level, some on a much lower level. But besides that, forget going all the way back to Moshe and the Avot. V'chein, and so too, v'chol dor v'dor yesh rashei alfei Yisrael. In every generation, there are thousands of people who are like the I don't like using the word, but the upper tier, the higher level, known neshamot, that the shenishmotehem hem bechinat rosh u'moach, v'gabei neshamot hahamon v'amei haaretz. That you have people, we know, there are people we call the Gedolim, right? We have people whose neshamot are on such a high level that we couldn't even imagine that we might want to aspire to. And on the other hand, you have neshamot within the generation that not so high. You have the average person in the street. You have people who are boors, but they all have a neshama from Hashem. And furthermore, nefashot legabe nefashot. Even within one neshama, ki kol nefesh kula min nefesh ruach uneshama. We're going to discuss this at a later date, but I'm just going to give you a thumbnail what this means. Every neshama is broken down into multiple parts. We're going to refer to it as naran, nefesh, ruach, neshama. And within the naran, within the nefesh and ruach, neshama, there are different levels within the same person sometimes. Nevertheless, in spite of the fact that we see that within the time from Moshe to the current generation, or from when your own generation, or within your own being, that there are multiple levels of neshamot, as he says, tens of thousands of levels. How does that make sense? If that's the case, if everything comes from Hashem, you just told me, let me give an example. I take 3 balloons and I breathe in and I take a deep breath and I blow up 3 balloons. And then you test the DNA in those balloons. And I blow them up the exact same amount of air. They have the same elasticity. They have the same everything. Those 3 balloons will be identical. Nachon? I blew from my inside. And I thought about it. I took them. I blew them up. Same thing. So how is it if everything came, and he's using the mashal that it came from the machashavot of Hashem, from the deepest part of Hashem, as it were, that you can have different levels of neshamot. They should all be the same. Mikol makom, nevertheless, shoresh kol hanefesh ruach unishama. Nevertheless, in spite of the fact that we know that there are different levels of nishamot, kulam mirosh kol hamadregot ad sof kol dargin hamelubash beguf amei haaretz v'kal shebekalim. No matter what level neshama, no matter what, whether from the top to the lowest level, some slight paraphrase here, because I'll explain why. Nevertheless, nimshach mimoach ha'elyon. They all come from Hashem. The moach elyon literally means the superior brain, the high brain. Shehi chochma ila'a kivyachol, which is from the Hashem's intellect, which we described before as being the Yodea, like the Ramban says, the one who knows, and as I translated before. All that comes from the same source, in spite of the fact that everything comes from Hashem in that spot, so to speak. It still gives us different levels of neshamot. Why? Continue with the mashal. K'mashal haben hanimshach mimoach ha'av. Like the same mashal that he just gave before, of the son that comes from the brain of the father. Shafilu tzipornei raglav nitavu mitipa zo mamash. If you take a look at a person's toenails, those toenails, no different than the brain of that person, no different than the spleen, no different than the fingers. Every single thing from that person began in the zera, from the sperm of that father, correct? And then when it started growing, it was 9 months in the mother. That initial amount of, let's just call it DNA, went down from one level to another level. Lihishtanot ulihitavot bimena tzipornaim. The exact same zera that went into the woman, that created a blastocyst, then a fetus, and then a baby. That exact same sperm is what gave birth, in quotes, to the child's brain and the toenails. And they are inseparable from the father. They all started back there. They are all part of the father. Well, let's use modern terminology, because he didn't know from DNA. If you test the DNA of a hair follicle, a brain cell, you could do that, I assume, from a toenail, they're all the same DNA from the parent, from the father and the mother. I'm not saying that nothing about the mother. We're just staying with this mashal of the ben from the father, because again, where it all began, we're moving back. That means that there are nishamot, to use his mashal now, that there are nishamot that are like the brain equivalent. There are neshamot that are like the stomach, and there are neshamot that are like the level of the toenails in this mashal. Let's talk normal language now. After a child is conceived, that initial DNA contribution from the man and the woman, which sounds very sterile. That's not a good joke or pun to use, I guess, but it sounds very, it is. It's an initial combination of the DNA of the mother and the DNA of the father. And which the Pirkei Avot refers to it as a tipas sucha, a putrid drop, brings about in a most miraculous way a baby. When you look at a baby, you see the head, the body, the feet. What do you always say? Oh, you go, Baruch Hashem, 10 fingers, 10 toes. Baruch Hashem, a healthy baby, it's breathing, good APGAR score, all that wonderful stuff. But there is the same connection from the father to that child's brain as to that child's toenail. When Hashem created the neshama elokit, when he brought about the neshama elokit through his machashavot, which we don't understand again, but when he brought about the neshama elokit, everything stems from Hashem. Just like every child part of the body stems from the father and the mother. But there are different levels. There are different levels in a human being's body. You can't say that the toenails are more important. Did you cut the toenails off? They don't have any pain receptors. It doesn't hurt when you cut your toenail off. It's not necessary at the moment. It's not part of you, but it's still a part of you that came from the father. The brain, on the other hand, is the exact opposite end of the spectrum. The brain is one of the most important parts of the entire body. It's also from the father. So too, there are nishamot that are higher level and lower level, but they all stem from the same source. Question could be then, hey, that's not fair. It's not fair. Why is it that Rav Moshe Feinstein Zecher Tzadik V'Kadosh Livracha had the neshama that he had with the brilliant genius that he was and the ability to do what he did, and I have what I have, and you have what you have? That's not fair. Why don't we all have a fair shot? Doesn't that hamper our ability to serve Hashem properly? Because they were given an advantage. Imagine you have a race, you have a track, and you tell one guy he has a 3-second head start, and then everyone else gets to run. Well, the guy who has the 3-second head start is already ahead of the game, literally. So why is that fair? He's going to win the race. Because we think in terms of fairness. There's no concept of fairness here. It's not what this is about. It's not a race. We have to understand that Hashem gave us the neshama that was for us. Hashem gave us the neshama that we need to be in this world at this time period to do what we need to do to serve Hashem. Some people have a greater struggle to access that nefesh elokit. Some will have a less great struggle to access that nefesh elokit. What does it do? That's going to be coming up. We'll see. But the main thing to get out of right now is that the source of the neshama elokit is not just that Hashem breathed it from the inside, so to speak, and therefore we know it's an extension of God. It's a chelek elokam imal, but it goes even deeper than that. It stems from the machashavot of Hashem, in spite of the fact that we don't fully grasp the topic or the understanding of machashavot Hashem. So that when the neshamot came down here, they were an direct extension of the elokut, or the godliness of Hashem in every single one of us. But again, what is the purpose of the nefesh elokit? We know that we said that when we talked about the nefesh habahamit, we talked about two parts. There was the nefesh elokit, nefesh habahamit, and then the nefesh habahamit, there were subdivisions. There was the Yetzer Tov and Yetzer Hara. What's the nefesh elokit made up of? Why do we need it? What's it there for? I mean, non-Jews have it. And we talked about the fact that non-Jews can do some very, very good. We know they can do some very good things in this world. Okay, so we're going to come to that Bezrat Hashem, slowly. We're going to continue. I have told you, for those who may have come in late, I have to cut it short tonight to make a phone call. Bezrat Hashem, we'll pick it up on Tuesday next week. All should go well. We should be back together on Tuesday. But I will leave you with the thought that to kind of ponder the soul, the neshama itself, which is because it is spiritual, it's not something physical. It makes it that much more difficult to really comprehend all these different ideas. But take the time, if you have a chance, before the next class, just reread these few lines. We did what, 10, 12, 14 lines, whatever it was. Reread them, go over them, think about what the Admor Zaken is telling us about this. He cannot jump in and tell us yet what is the purpose of the soul until we understand where it comes from, what is there, how it's part of us, to deal with these questions of how come this person neshama seems to be a much higher level than that person's neshama, and how do I even know that? How do I know that? Well, we see that from in Tachlis, the way people learn, the way they grow, not physically, talking spiritually. So since it's Thursday night, I wish you all a Shabbat Shalom. Should be a good Shabbat for everybody, Bezrat Hashem, and I'm glad you're all able to be here tonight. Thanks.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Very well.
Thank you. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat
Bye.
Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom, everybody.
Be well,
Shalom,
everyone.
Rabbi.
Thank you.